So here I'm going to present, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit on this book. I'll take Jane Dillenberger's book, Religious Art of Picasso, as a starting point. And I just received an email today that my copy of this book has arrived today. Okay. I knew that two others had already checked it out through Summit. I didn't want to drain all of the copies out of Summit, so I hesitated a little bit, and then I thought, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and order it, but only ordered last week and only came in. But anyway, I was able to look a little bit into the preface and introduction of the book on Google Books, and the other source, I think Ken's outline, and then your presentation basically lists all of the works in there as well. So I kind of went with that. And yeah, as I mentioned, his book, or Jane Dillenberger's book, collaborating with John Hanley, came out in 2014. She had been at Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, where I studied as well. And so when they had an event celebrating the release of her book, and so there I was able to get a picture with them. And here it's just a review of mainly what Ken has presented as well. The works of art that are included in Jane Dillenberger's book, The Religious Art of Picasso. Obviously, First Communion, 1896. He was born in 1881, so at about the age of 15. If you look at his career, in his teenage years, these are the kinds of paintings he was doing. He was not painting abstract and cubist. That came later, but it does show that, he had pretty well mastered fairly traditional painting at a young age. First Communion, and I think Ken also raised a very good question, how religious are Picasso's work? What kind of religious message is being conveyed, or are these just the symbols of his Spanish Catholic upbringing that he's using? I guess the question is, how intentional is his usage here? And so that's a good question. To me, Science and Charity appears as having some religious content. In some ways, I see this painting as like a question mark, and especially with the title, Science and Charity. Certainly it looks like the man on the left represents science, and the religious sister represents charity when it comes to death. And so to me, Picasso is posing a question, is kind of like, there's a competition between science and charity for, you could say, the soul of the individual here. So yes, Jane Dillenberger includes this in the book, but right, what does it say about religion? It might not necessarily be religious in that sense. It seems to be basically a question mark. Obviously, the crucifixion painting as well. Here, I'm actually just kind of going through and summarizing Guernica as well. the man with the lamb sculpture, the examples that Jane Dillenberger has used. Now, what I want to do, right, so that was just kind of a review. You basically saw a lot of that with Ken's presentation, and then I just kind of reiterated some of the key pieces that Jane Dillenberger includes in her book on the religious art of Picasso. And I thought, something that I'd like to do is add to that. Add something that I think is in line with what Jane Dillenberger is trying to present, even if her book does not include what I'm about to include. It's just kind of a way of kind of contributing, kind of taking what I perceive as Jane Dillenberger's approach and elaborating. And certainly, I think we could very easily say that Jane Dillenberger's book on the religious art of Picasso, we shouldn't take that as Picasso did not do any religious art beyond what is stated in this book. Because if anything, Picasso made a huge amount of art. So when we measure Picasso as an artist, one measure, there is obviously the quality of art. And when it comes to quality, that's up for debate. But he also really did produce an incredible amount of art. I don't know if you could really find another artist that created as much quantity of art as he did. For one, to become quite successful as an artist in his 20s, to be able to continue to, purchase endless amounts of paint and materials to produce endless amounts of paintings, whatever size he wanted to. And as Ken mentioned, at least 7 decades of producing art. You could add an 8th decade if you want to include his teenage years, which, certainly, as we saw, the First Communion, Science and Charity, the works he did as a teenager were not things that you would say, he's really practicing, he's learning how to make art, but I mean, he is already quite accomplished as a teenager to the point where, you can include that work when you look at him as a whole, that you could say a good 8 decades of art. He lived to be about 90, and who knows, maybe even in his first 10 years may have had some interesting drawings as well. So I think what I'm going to do here is to elaborate. I think that we could also include Picasso's blue period. I think in my mind, I see the blue period as being a very, something that fits in with this idea of the religious art of Picasso, or at least the spiritual art of Picasso. I make the distinction between religious and spiritual here in the sense that in this case and in other cases as well, but if we look at Picasso's work, I'm not really sure if I want to call it religious. I think of religious as being a little bit more of the formal, institutional expressions of religion, which would include more traditional kinds of religious subject matters, biblical scenes, scenes from the life of Jesus, images of saints, and these kinds of things. And with Picasso's art, we're not finding that kind of religious art. And that is along the lines with Jane Dillenberger as well. Some of the images, you could say, the man with a lamb is kind of evokes a good shepherd type of, or we could look into Guernica and potentially see religious themes. So we're talking about religious themes in art that is not necessarily particularly religious. And I just it would add the word spiritual is another way of approaching this, is that there's something also spiritual. And when I say spiritual, I'm referring to things that are kind of more loosely, more vaguely religious, and not necessarily associated with one particular religion either. Okay. Now, when I was browsing, at least through Google Books, on into Jane Dillenberger's Religious Art of Picasso, I noticed a few pieces from the Blue Period that she included. One being this one, The Old Guitarist. Now, the Blue Period is going to be basically from 1901 to 1904. Okay. The other piece that, or series really of works that Dillenberger includes are the images and the paintings, Death of Casahemus. All right, so really very, very tragic story. And I just always kind of think about Picasso's young years, you know, as he did not last very long in art school. You know, he really kind of came into art school with already quite accomplished, according to what an art school is going to teach a painter how to paint. You know, so you saw the works he created as a teenager and so forth. And clearly he was someone who was innovating, not simply learning from others how to paint. He was ready to start innovating. But when I think of Picasso's early years, you know, this is a time where if you actually look at some of the work he created right before the Blue Period, a lot of them, they're influenced by another French artist who did a lot of poster designs, Toulouse-Lautrec. And Picasso's work right before the Blue Period has a lot to do with parties, people partying, you know, people in taverns, and the work is colorful and playful, and but still kind of like an underlying darkness within the works before the Blue Period. But really, it seems to be that the death of his friend Carlos Casahemus kind of would be something that initiates the Blue Period. If you think of the Blue Period as a time where it seems, you know, from a distance of history, that Picasso was likely to have been psychologically depressed. He had lost his friend. The situation being that his friend Casahemus fell in love with a woman. I don't remember her name right now. Hermaine. Okay. So Carlos Casahemus fell in love with Hermaine. But you know, over the course of this, he found that he was impotent. Right. So just to put it bluntly, was not able to have an erection and was not able to consummate a sexual relationship. And so really just a helpless situation that he was in love with someone who rejected him. maybe for other reasons, but that being one of the reasons as well. And he ultimately, some of these details come from a movie or a series that came out on Picasso, 10-part series called like National Geographic Genius series on Picasso that Casagemas, I think, yeah, it's a Spanish sounding name. I think he was originally from Spain as well, and someone who was a friend of Picasso's in Paris, and they returned to Spain for some time. And I think it had something to do with Casagemas kind of sorting things out in his mind. And Casagemas was to return to Paris while Picasso stayed back in Spain. And then during this time, Picasso thought, okay, Casagemas is in a good mood now. He feels like he's back on track. He's ready to face life again. And then Picasso receives news that Casagemas had returned to Paris, and in one of their celebrations among friends, he stood up and shot Hermine and then shot himself. And he killed himself while Hermine survived. So the death of Casagemas and all the situation is just, to me, this is Picasso at 20 years old. And in my experience, and I think, it certainly happens, but to have the death of such a close friend at that age, seems like it would just have a tremendous psychological impact. And Picasso was someone who would continue to paint a variety of different images on the same, a variety of works on the same theme, another version of the death of Casagemas. Okay, and now, so with that, I've kind of covered at least the works of Picasso's blue period that Jane Dillenberger refers to, a few of the Death of Casagemas pieces, as well as The Old Guitarist. And then here are some other images, works of art from Picasso from the blue period that I put forward as I think these really convey what I see as some of the more spiritual of Picasso's art. And in some ways, you can also see some more specifically religious references. Here again from the blue period, this is called The Visit Between Two Sisters. And, if I were to ask if there's a particular scene from the Bible, religious scene that you might associate this image with, what would you say? Ken?
Mary Magdalene and Jesus' mom.
Okay, all right, okay. There is sometimes, there's a feast, and seen in the Bible, sometimes referred to as the visitation. And right, Mary visits with her sister Elizabeth, and they share the news that Mary is to have a child, which will be Jesus. So in some ways, this reminds me, and it seems like there could be an intentional implication reference here to the visitation. To me, it really looks like the way this leg is standing and that foot is painted that way is like very common in statues and paintings of Mary. So I see that. But it's hard to tell who is Mary and who would be Elizabeth if that were true. And something that I just actually noticed is that there is a baby in her arms, when I noticed there is this little hand here, and it looks like the baby is being breastfed as at the same time as well. So I do think that there is even in this kind of a specific religious connotation there. And again, maybe to some degree, accentuated further with this arch here that seems to imply a church. Again, same question is, what is Picasso trying to convey here? It doesn't appear that he wants to really make a religious work or to kind of spread the gospel of Jesus through his work. If anything, it seems like maybe he might be kind of secularizing religious images in some way. It just to me, there's something to think about with this and other works of art from the Blue period and what they might convey spiritually. If anything, throughout the Blue period, you can see, there's a variety of explanations for the Blue period. Sometimes, the theory is that Picasso was just beginning his career. He didn't have that much money. He just happened to buy more blue paint than any other color. So maybe more of a practical reason. But to me, it does seem like 1901, the death of Casahemus, his friend, played a big part in that. And from that point on, a lot of his subjects in the Blue period, you can see this with the old guitarist as well. A lot of the subjects that he's painting are people in poverty, people who are suffering. And I know that there is definitely justifiable criticism of photographers who would take photos of people living on the streets, that there's voyeurism and exploitation that comes with, taking photos of people like this. It has been done throughout history. There's a series of photos of people who were suffering and in transition during the Great Depression. And some of these photos really kind of conveyed the struggle of the people who were depicted in the photos. And I feel like the criticism of taking photographs of people living on the streets doesn't apply. It's different when it comes to painting. And in my mind, I'm thinking that Picasso, definitely over the course of his life, you can look at him as, I'm going to use a very tame word here, is he could be a real jerk, to put it mildly. But in this case, I don't think he would go as far as just setting up a canvas as in front of someone who was on the streets. As much as, to me, some of these images, I think this painting, the old guitarist, he's probably painting from memory. If it was someone who he saw, or he could be painting from memory of something that he saw, or he could be painting from imagination. Basically just, but his concern at this time is people living in poverty, people struggling. And when I really started getting into Picasso's art in my early 20s. This is one of the paintings that really struck me as well, portrait of Celestina. And in my mind, this is a portrait where it seems like he painted her from life. She, to me, is likely someone that he knew, to be able, and that she was willing to pose for him, to be painted. But clearly, she has the one blind eye, and I guess to me, he is painting those who are on the margins of society in various ways, but I feel like he's painting them with a lot of compassion. And that's where I would associate the works of the Blue Period, with spirituality, that there's just that sense of compassion that he, paints his subject matters with. Another, and I'm speculating here, but to me, this also appears to be something that he may have painted from memory or from imagination. And some of that is in contrast to Celestina. It just seems like there's some very distinct parts, like she is a face that you can imagine, that's the face of a real person. Here, the face is a little bit more generic, in a sense, non-specific. That makes me think that it's painted from memory or imagination. But again, with that theme, and if anything, just conveying with the with her head forward, with the back arced like this, hard work, poverty, struggle. This painting is not as blue as the others, but still within that time period, a little bit later within that Blue Period. And then finally, does anyone know who this is a portrait of? Okay, all right, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, it's a self-portrait. I thought this was gonna be the label, but yeah, there is that label there. Okay, yeah, so to me, so this comes early in the Blue Period, right at the beginning of the Blue Period, and the self-portrait. And to me, the self-portrait within the Blue Period really adds to my sense of the Blue Period as representing some of Picasso's spiritual art. That here he is basically identifying himself with those that he's painting throughout the Blue Period. Celestina, the old guitarist, woman ironing, crouching beggar, all of these, that he's painting himself in that style. And that, yeah, basically he himself is the painter, the creator of the Blue Period, but he is a subject of the Blue Period himself, implying that he himself is struggling with poverty and so forth. There's also just a very strong sense of cold here. The overcoat, the blue adds to that sense of coldness, a winter coldness, a psychological coldness. You see the blue in his face, in his facial features. I actually zoomed and created that to kind of zoom into his face a little bit more. Much more gaunt around the cheekbones and the eyes, and so forth. In my mind, I really think of this as a very unique Picasso self-portrait. I think all of his self-portraits are unique in various ways, but in some ways, this does not look as much like Picasso as some of his other self-portraits, even if this is one of the less abstract images. His eyes and nose and mouth, a lot of that do appear to be his facial features, but typically in photos and in his self-portraits, he has a very, very sharp part in his hair. Whereas here, you don't really see that part in his hair. Also, this is one period in his life which is somewhat unique, where he has a beard. There aren't really too many other times in his life, and I don't recall seeing any photo of him with a beard. So to me, there is a sense of more of a sense of a humility, a sense of compassion, and so forth between 1904 and between 1901 and 1904, the blue period, approximately the ages of 20 to 23. Here, I just include a few other self-portraits as points of comparison. This is going to be after the blue period. This is going to be starting to get into Cubism. And this is also a time where he's very much influenced by African masks. So in that sense, his own face here appears a little bit more mask-like than the previous one from the blue period. Brighter colors, just more of a sense of health, like physical health, possibly translated into psychological health as well. Just appears to be more muscular, not bundled up as if he's not bundled up in a winter's jacket, and so forth. And then again, just 1 year later, 1907, a self-portrait. And so that's where I really point out the blue period as a particular time where Picasso's work have a very strong spirituality. And later works, such as this, he's starting to get into Cubism. This is what I mentioned as well, as far as a very strong part of his hair, that is kind of distinct, that this identifies him as Picasso. But here, and I guess you could say the next, 5 decades or so, is works where he is more creative. And in my mind, I'm not seeing as strong spirituality as I see in the blue period. There's always ways that you can kind of, take a closer look and find religious themes, but generally speaking, he's more interested in pushing the boundaries of painting, and that kind of spirituality of the blue period is not quite as strongly conveyed. And here's another self-portrait then from 1965, about 8 years before his death in 1972. So yeah, from this point on, his portraits of other people, his portraits of himself are typically much more abstract, much more about pushing boundaries, and so forth, than that time of the Blue Period, where he really portrays his subjects with a sense of compassion and seems to really identify with poverty and struggle and the coldness, the loneliness of the world and so forth. So that is some comments that I would have on this particular period and ways of looking at the Blue Period of Picasso's career as particularly having some spiritual significance. Something that occurred to me is that I have a sense that, in a way, that Blue Period was a time in his life, those 3 years, over the course of the next, 6 or 7 decades, I don't really get a sense that he ever really returned to that. I don't know how much he kept in touch with any people he met from that time period other than, I know that he definitely made a lot of connections with art dealers and so forth, but generally speaking, the kind of spirit of the Blue Period is something that it comes early in his career and something he doesn't really seem to return to that degree ever again over the course of his career. So I would see the Blue Period as particularly of spiritual significance in that way. And